Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching the big India Today CII Industry Roundtable. Ordinarily, with just a few days to go for the budget, we ask industry, we ask economists what they'd like to see the government do over the next 5 years, what they'd like to see in the union budget, because you want to know what the roadmap into the future is. But we find ourselves in a very unique perspective where many people don't know where we're at, because there's a big debate about GDP numbers and whether the Indian economy has indeed been growing at the speed that the government would have us believe, because we've had former Chief Economic Advisor to the government, Arvind Subramaniam, say that the economy is actually growing at 2.5% less than the government has been claiming. So where are we at? Where do we need to go? Why is consumer demand slipping? And what needs to be done from here? To discuss these very, very critical issues which impact every one of our lives, I want to introduce the special guests joining us for this special roundtable. I'll start by introducing the current president of CII, Vikram Kirloskar, vice chairman at Toyota Kirloskar Motors. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Flanking him, we've got Ajay Shriram, chairman and senior managing director at DCM Shriram. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Also with us, TV Narendran. He's the global CEO and managing director of Tata Steel. Welcome to some very heavyweight corporate voices for a political perspective. We're joined by Narendra Taneja, spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Welcome Arun Kumar, flanks him for a contrarian view, an economist who believes that some of the spin that the government's trying to do is more rosy than it actually is. And finally, last but not least, Jaijit Bhattacharya is an economist, also president of the Center for Digital Economy and Policy Research. So welcome to all our guests. Let's take question number one on this big industry round table. Is the Indian economy growing at a speed that is a lot slower than the Indian government would have us believe? This is important. You can't plan for the future till the time you know where you're at, because policy interventions change completely. Let me ask the CII president first. Does it feel from your perspective that we've been growing at 7.5%? Or do you think Arvind Subramaniam could have a case when he argues that the Indian economy is actually only growing at 4.5%?
Well, let me put it from my... I'm not an economist. I run an industry. I work in the auto industry. And from my viewpoint, I have no idea how these calculations are made and how they are shown. But certainly for the last, say, 5 years, the auto industry has been growing quite well, except for the last 6 months. Last 6 months has been trouble. But typically in industrial cycles, we see good cycles for 4-5 years, sometimes see a dip. So that's the base thing. I seen another business which I have, which is in forklifts, which is also an indication of the economy, which has grown phenomenally in the especially last 12 months, and even this year there has been growth in orders. So that's the way I look at the economy. Now, what are the issues I look at in the auto industry? There are two things which I'm not sure which is it, because I don't have enough data. One is a good thing, if I'm right, is the structural issue. The amount of metros in the country has increased phenomenally. Okay, we used to talk of Delhi and Calcutta. Now we have metros across the country, 18 cities, I think. And if more metro ridership is reducing perhaps car demand, it's a very good thing. Okay, because we want to go on the metro way, definitely. Also, shared mobility I think is making a difference. Both these are good things for the environment and generally for efficiency. And this will correct itself. This will correct the demand if this is it. The second thing is also on the money side of in the auto industry, where there have been add-ons in the cost of a vehicle. Insurance, registration, which would be for 1 year, has gone to maybe for 4 or 5 years. So that's an additional cost add-on, which is not financed by retail finance. Retail finance already is expensive compared to the inflation rate. The real interest rates are high. First you have to have it, and then the real interest rates are high. I think both these issues are contributing, say, for the auto industry, which is a large part of the manufacturing industry, and which
because
has
we've
been in
seen
the
actually
papers a
some
lot.
very depressing numbers from the auto sector. Demand for their vehicles has really gone down. So we'll build on this in a moment. But I want to ask Ajay Shriram next whether you're concerned that the Indian economy could actually have been growing a lot slower than the numbers that we've been seeing from the government.
You know, my experience first, I think when we're looking at an economy in totality, I think looking at 3 months and 6 months is not the correct way to do it. It has to be a longer horizon. if we take the last 5 years, to add to what Vikram was saying, it's grown well. We can't dispute that. Couple of examples which I can give. If we see, we are in the agricultural area and sugarcane business. The farmers actually are having a problem getting labor to harvest the sugarcane. The cost of that labor has gone up by 50-60% because there's a shortage of labor. People are not available. If we were to take the last 6 months per se only, I think there is a little bit of anxiety which comes in the mind of an investor or a buyer because of the forthcoming elections. What is going to be the outcome? Should we invest money now to put in capital expenditure? Should we hold it back? Let's wait for 3 months more. We get a clearer picture. I think that little bit of uncertainty has been there. My view is, with this definitive government now, in absolute majority, I think the growth rate will pick up and pick up well. On this point you're mentioning of Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, I respect him a lot. I had an opportunity to meet him and I appreciate his views a lot. I really wish and hoped that if he had these observations, I think it would have helped the government a lot if he'd done it when he was in government.
That's a very good point you
rather
make.
than bringing it
And
now.
there is and I want to ask
I think
Arun
that would
Kumar
be a
this
difference.
question because there's a lot of hypocrisy in having been in government, sat in the finance ministry for all this while, not said a word about how the numbers are not adding up in public. He says, oh, I said it in private. We don't know what he said in private and to whom. Nobody ever said the numbers are fuzzy. Now you're sitting at Harvard University, you come up with a sensational paper, the whole world is looking at this, you're denting the credibility of the India story. Is that even fair? Arun Kumar?
Let's look at what has he said. He says that in the economic survey 3 years back, he had flagged the issue that there's something of mismatch between the rate of growth and the fast, other data that is available, So he had flagged the issue a little bit. It's true that he didn't come out openly with it. And this kind of research that he's done is different from calculating GDP in the normal way. And why is it that GDP was suspect? Because there's been a lot of controversy building up over GDP since 2015, 14-15 when the results were declared, on the due base of the GDP. So first, you see, there is a missing component on the MCA 21 database. And there's a controversy that you're using a blowing up factor without knowing how the blowing up should be done. So
No, because what's the unstated insinuation that the Modi Sarkar... One second.
Yeah.
The unstated insinuation is that the Modi Sarkar is making the economy look rosier than it is because it benefits them politically. The fact of the matter is, most of the calculations which were done in coming up with the new GDP series was actually done by technocrats at the time when Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister, sir.
So the methodology change was started when the Manmohan Singh government was there. The results came when the new BJP government had come to power, right? But what are the controversy? There are 4 different controversies that came up why the GDP data became suspect. First was this blowing up factor, which led to an increase in the GDP. You don't know whether these are shell companies, what companies, they're not reporting, they're reporting once in 3 years. So there's a lot of problem with them. Second was that when the thing came, then there was no back series. Now without a back series, how do you make comparisons? So that's the second controversy. The third controversy was that the government said we reject it, because it was showing higher growth for the UPA period. Then the third was when this government presented its own data which showed that NDA was doing better than the UPA. So there's one more controversy, and now there's a fourth controversy of missing companies. 36% of the companies are missing in the MCA 21 database. So given the controversy, you needed a different method to calculate GDP, and that's what he's done. He's given a different method to calculate GDP. You may agree or disagree with
but
it.
Jayajit Bhattacharya, he's also looking at other economies at similar income levels to say that this is how the Indian economy could be growing depending on the various markers that he's looking at. Now, many economists are arguing that just because you're looking at other economies, it doesn't mean that that's the way the Indian economy is going. And most economists would agree that the new manner in which the GDP numbers are calculated is actually more statistically robust than the old-fashioned. It's actually an improvement. Do you think that or not?
No, absolutely. Let me simplify the conversation. Let's look at the smell test. Let me draw an analogy first that if Google Maps says here is where the building is and the building is not there, you will say no, the building is wrong and the Google Maps is right. That's what's happening. It's an indicator. But let's do the smell test. You remember the 90s when there was liberalization happening, salaries were going through the roof, there was a lot of growth that happened, and then the dot-com bust happened in 2000. Post that, we are claiming we are having a higher growth rate than what we had in 90s, but that's not reflected in the salaries, that's not reflected in the growth rates, that's not reflected in many other parameters that we see in the economy. So to an extent, I think what Subramaniam is coming back and saying is that that there was something wrong in the smell test for last 2 decades. It's not just the current 5 years or the last 5 years. The last 2 decades, there seems to be a mismatch between what's being promoted as the growth rate and what's being seen on the ground. There's a bit of a mismatch. The second part to the fact is that the structure of the Indian economy is significantly different. We still are a rain-dependent economy, which is very strange. We are significantly agrarian. In the last 18 years, 13 years were rain deficit. So we are still looking at the sky and figuring out whether there will be auto sales happening or two-wheeler sales happening. So after more than 70 years, we're still agrarian. 60% of our population is dependent on agriculture, even though it's a tinier portion of the economy per se, but 60% of the population is still living off agriculture. And if agriculture tanks, which is what it seems to be, possibly due to climate change, but it has a huge real impact on the economy, and that 60% is not able to spend.
Does the smell test match for you? When you look at your own numbers and you look at, for example, from the customer's perspective or those who are watching, if they feel their salaries aren't growing enough and yet the Modi Sarkar says that, oh, we're growing at 7%, do you see a mismatch?
So I think if I look at some of the measures, steel is in some sense a surrogate indicator of economic activity. The steel industry has been growing at about 6 to 7%. So it's not very far away from the numbers which I reported. Second point I want to make is India has a very large informal economy which is slowly transitioning into a formal economy. So even within the steel industry, there's a part of steel production which is very easy to measure and is reported. And there is a part of steel production which is an estimate, okay, which is the unorganized sector. So I'm not very surprised that there may be different views on the numbers because the accuracy really depends on the part of the economy you're measuring. And as we have GST and as we have many other actions being taken by the government to formalize economy, I think there will be a convergence maybe between the activity on the ground and the reported numbers. So from our point of view, we've been seeing 6 to 7% growth in steel consumption. Some sectors like auto grew much faster than that. Construction, some parts of construction grew fast like infrastructure. Some parts like residential did not grow so fast. So different segments move differently. The rural economy did struggle over the last couple of years. It is reflected in motorcycle sales and things like that. But overall, I can see it's not, I don't believe it is as divergent as has been reported.
What do you make of this assertion of the smell test that if all the markers are suggesting that consumption demand, for example, is going down, now you've already had a big debate around government data on your watch. Reports held back because the reports don't present government's performance in favorable light. Now in the middle of all of this, a man you had as your chief economic advisor says the Indian economy grew at 2.5% lesser than you've been claiming.
Well, Rahul, depends how you look at economy. Economy is like moon in this space. If you look at the moon the right way, you get the full moon. You go on the other side, you don't see anything. And the second question is, when, as the political party, we look at economy slightly differently. First of all, long-term view. Second is that we put people at the center. People. And when you put people at the center, the picture is different, your priorities are different, you look at everything quite differently. The fact is you ask the people of the country and they are happy. There are 67% people were kept out of the banking system. And there were people, Arvind Subramaniam included, they praised that growth. What is the point of such a growth? You know, people didn't have access to fuel, people didn't have access to electricity. So when we moved into power, Rahul, in 2014, we realized when we look at the basement of the India's, this pyramid, the economic pyramid we saw, there were termites all over. So we had the option either to keep building, actually add more floors and go to the world and say, look, this is what we have done, or first go and basically get rid of those termites. That's what we did. Demonetization was part of that exercise. Some economists may disagree, they're entitled to. But the fact is we realize, so from the very first day we have been working on strengthening the foundation, formalizing the economy, mainstreaming even the poorest in terms of economic gains, what country has gained. And at the same time, pushing people so they're part of the banking system. You were not part, 67% people were not part of the banking system. That was the banking apartheid that they practiced. In a democracy, could you continue with that? No, we said no. So what the work we have done is basically...
None of this is answering the question on growth.
No.
Are we growing at 2.5% lesser than you've been claiming?
I'm answering, actually this precisely is the debate. I'm answering your question. I'm just saying because we have put people at the center and we said of India's economy, we have strengthened the foundation. Yes, it takes time and we have to strengthen the foundation on which the building already stands. That's why. But what I have actually answered your question. Ask the ordinary people, ask the ordinary beneficiary, ask the ordinary villager. They will tell you that these
That's
are
a
right
good,
question.
convenient
That's the problem.
explanation from the government
No,
that
no,
we've
no,
just
this
come
is not
back with
convenient.
300 seats. If people didn't think we were doing good enough, we would have been hammered out of power. But while there is a debate that rages over growth numbers, what is undisputed is that consumption demand is going down. So why is consumer demand going down, and what can be done to reverse this trend? We'll start with Mr. Narendra this time.
I think one is, of course, the liquidity in the system is obviously an issue. I think over the last 2 years, we've seen a little bit of issue there. The government is taking action, the RBI is taking action. It hasn't helped that globally there is a concern now because of the trade actions being contemplated by different governments. So overall, the macroeconomic story is a bit softer than it was earlier. I think pump priming the economy, the government's aim to spend a lot on infrastructure. That's certainly going to put money in the economy. Construction is a great employment generator. It creates employment far away from the urban centers, which also is important. And I think a good monsoon will certainly help the rural economy. And the actions taken by RBI, reducing the cost of money, pumping in more liquidity into the system, and addressing the NBFC issue will also bring more liquidity back into the economy, and I think that will help the consumption
Mr.
story.
Kirloskar, in your view, has the decline bottomed out? Will we now see a bounce back? Why do you think consumer demand has gone down in the way that it has? What should this government be doing to fix it?
You know, like just to add in the auto, the cost has gone up because you're prepaying for insurance, prepaying for registration and things like that. So those areas definitely the cost has gone up, and a consumer has limited money. Finally, you know, we have some limits. He's going to think twice before spending another couple of lakhs for a vehicle because of these two additional things. Cost of BS6 environment and safety norms in the automobile industry have also raised the price of vehicles. So the cost structure has definitely gone up. And that's one of the activities we have to focus on. We have to convince the consumer he has to pay more for this. It's a long-term investment for him. Again, I said, liquidity and the real interest cost is an issue. Liquidity, some people say, is available, but the real interest cost is the issue. The retail finance minus inflation, it is high. That is one of the feelings that is coming out.
Mr. Shriram, according to you, what should this government be doing on priority to ensure that consumer demand, which is slacked, gets a bump?
I think a couple of things which have moved and which are positive is the interest rates, as we mentioned by my colleagues. I think inflation is also well under control, which is a positive sign. But one area which requires attention to my mind to actually give an income source and a better life is the agriculture sector in India, which unfortunately has not moved in as structured a beneficial way for the farmer as it should have. To give an example, if you were to take some of the organized sector in agriculture, like sugar industry or some of these soft drinks, juices industry or export of fruits and vegetable industry, where there's an organized sector between a buyer and a farmer and one or two maximum middlemen as aggregators, but not middlemen. Today there are 5 to 6 middlemen between the farmer and the retail price, and the price which the farmer gets is between 15 and 25% of what the retailer pays. We have to aggregate this in a much more structured way so that the farmer gets at least 40 to 50% of what the retail price is.
Here's what is being suggested, that because there was an election round the corner, because there was the specter of political uncertainty, therefore a lot of consumers simply cut back. Now that you've got a strong majority government in place, a lot of this will auto-correct, and therefore the suggestion is that the decline is already bottomed out and from now we'll see a jump. Do you share that optimism or not?
No, we must analyze the problem for where it began. We have a very large unorganized sector employing 94% of the workforce, and the organized sector which employs 6%. GST and demonetization hit the unorganized sector unambiguously because demonetization was all about cash and unorganized sector works with cash. So that was the first hit, then the GST, and then after that, the NBFC crisis. So again hit the unorganized sector because a lot of loan comes from there. So these three shocks have left the unorganized sector in very bad shape. So demand problem originates from there because if 94% begin to lose employment, and as the CMI data shows, you lost roughly 40 million workforce. You know, from 450 million, you came around to 410 million. So it's declined by roughly 10%. If unorganized sector, which produces 45% of the output, declined by 10%, that's minus 4.5% there. You know, and therefore the rate of growth is lower. And so the point I'm making is that demand shortage began there. It's now filtered down to the organized sector also. That's why you see the FMCG decline, you see the decline in the auto sector, and you see the decline in the other sector.
So you think we're nowhere close to a bottom?
So we're not close to the bottom unless we begin to address the unorganized sector. So interest rate policy will not help. Tax concession will not help. We have to focus on the unorganized sector.
One of the things, Narendra Taneja, the government pitched in a big way is that India is the fastest growing economy in the world. We've already lost that tag. We've handed it back to China. With 5.8% being the growth rate from January to March. This is the slowest in the last 5 years. By your own standards, with your new series, the economy doesn't seem to be doing very well, and Arun Kumar would argue that the bottom hasn't been hit yet.
So you buy everything that China says in terms of GDP data and growth data. Many don't. You see, the point is the Chinese data also. When Chinese put out their data, let's say they say 6% growth rate, the globally accepted formula is that you actually cut it by 2.5%. So we are still growing faster. Now, China is a friend, so we don't want to question it coming from the ruling party. But the point here is different. The point is when you look at the overall economy, Rahul, today, we are still the fastest growing large economy on the planet. One economist, Mr. Arvind, they can have their opinion. I'm told it's a working paper. So he says that it's a work in progress. Still, that's what a working paper is supposed to be all about. And it's Harvard University in Delhi has a different view. Harvard different. Tomorrow he moves to Tokyo, probably with a different view. The point here is different. The point is that when you look at economies all over the world, there are many other institutions. There is IMF, there is World Bank, there are private independent organizations, there are think tanks and all that. They all say India is the fastest growing economy in the world. It's not only the government of India. It's not only the people of India.
That's another argument that's been made, Jayajit, by the government, that it's not just the government data. All the private research houses have also put out data which broadly mirrors what the government's been saying.
No, absolutely. There's something wrong in the statistics. I was deeply involved in looking at the employment data. In fact, I created the report which I handed over personally to Piyush Goyal, which showed that the statistics we're using for the employment per se is grossly inadequate. In fact, to take the number that Mr. Arun just mentioned, that 14 million people dropped out from the workforce. Workforce is number of people who want to work. You can't just run away from not working. It's that you may lose a job. So unemployment would be number of people out of the workforce who do not work. And so you cannot have 14 million people going away from
40 million.
40 million, that's even higher, because in 2014 there was 20 million people who vanished from the workforce and came back the next year. So that's completely not understandable. And the reason that was given was women have dropped off from the workforce. Why will in 1 year 20 million women just drop off from the workforce and come back the next year? There's not a switch that you switch it on and switch it off. So there is clearly something very fundamentally wrong in the way the data is being compiled. And
which is also what makes any conversation around the economy so difficult, because unless you know what the data is, how do you even know whether you're doing well or not? You have to have a result, and then you can argue about the result and work out a projection from here on. So I'll slip into a very quick break right now. When we come back in the last part of the broadcast, we will look at what this industry roundtable believes the finance minister needs to do to address the problem of job creation. That is the biggest question in the economy. There's a raging debate around unemployment. What should be done to address the job question? That in part 2 of the India Today CII Industry Roundtable with CII. The biggest question in the economy at this moment is, what should the finance minister be doing to address the issue of job creation? Let me put that question first to Mr. Kirloskar. We are seeing a raging debate about employment, unemployment. The government's own NSSO data now says that we could be at a 4.5-decade high when it comes to unemployment numbers. How do you think the government should be tackling this issue?
Well, what we have suggested to the government is look at the 5 or 6 big employment creating areas like tourism, like the agro industry, like textile up to garments, auto industry, or even construction or retail. And think of the way Aadhaar was done. You know, you had a domain expert who ran Aadhaar, and Aadhaar got implemented beautifully. You see the results of Aadhaar. Look at domain experts looking at these industries. What do we do typically in a factory when we are short of money or we are short of resources? What do we do to make the best? We are always looking to remove bottlenecks and make the flow smooth. Can we look at the bottlenecks in these major industries?
How would you look at this issue of employment versus unemployment? What would you think the government needs to do to address the job issue?
First is, I think, on infrastructure. I think the government itself has said that they want to spend a lot on infrastructure. I think it creates jobs, it creates demand for work, it creates employment, like I said, far away from the urban areas. It also reduces the cost of doing business, because I think the second important point is to get back private sector investment. And private sector investment happens when private sector is profitable and has surplus funds to invest. And for that, I think while the government has done a good job on the ease of doing business, I think they need to do more work on the cost of doing business. So I think these are things which certainly help. Infusing more liquidity into the system also helps. So I think these are measures if the government focuses on. Of course, the government can't compromise on the fiscal deficit, because that will lead to inflation. I also think that the oil prices staying low is very important for the government, for the country, and for inflation, and hence lower interest rates. So I think there's a lot to do. There are some challenging times, but I think there's a fair amount of optimism, at least in India, that the second half of the year should be better than the first half.
So what's your sense of how bad the unemployment problem in India really is?
See, I think it's not unemployment. It may be more of underemployment. I think we have to get clarity on that. As I mentioned a little earlier, in certain areas in industry, we are seeing getting people is not so easy. But I think one area government needs to focus, and I hope this gets a much more sharper attention. We are looking at education in totality. I think what India needs to look at is focused vocational training, where people are they learn how to work with their hands. In Germany, 70 to 75% of people go through on-the-job, floor shop vocational training. I think that sort of a experience of learning is much more workable and employable than getting a BCom degree or BSc degree or BA degree from the hundreds of colleges we have in India, where the quality is suspect. I think we have to have a very sharp focus on vocational training.
Do you think people coming out of the colleges are unemployable for your perspective?
Well, I think the data everywhere shows from many colleges, the caliber and the competence of the graduates is not up to what you expect.
And there, Narendra, the government hasn't so far been able to deliver much results in terms of taking the efforts to ensure that the college graduates, the postgraduates are more employment. This is more employable. This is a constant complaint of India Inc.
Yeah, you see, we are coming out with a new education policy as well, as you know, but at the same time, education is not entirely the central subject. Different state governments, they come out with their own initiative. That's why if you see in some of the states, most particularly in the southern part of the country, they have done better than a state, let's say for the sake of discussion, in the northern part of the country. So the story differs from, state to state in our country. But the new education policy is addressing precisely the questions that you have just raised. But at the same time, to say that, unemployment or this is a crisis in the country, we don't believe it. It's not true. There are two reasons for that. Number one, that we have done our own surveys and we have also, been in touch with the people on the ground. The story is upward. Yes, as you said, underemployment.
The National Sample Survey Organization survey is your own study. It's the data coming out of the system which is now indicating that on a long-term horizon, unemployment is at a 4.5-decade high. Earlier it was a leaked report, ab to aapne public kar di.
No. But that covers only 20% of the reality, only 20%. We still have no mechanism. Now we are working on it, we are putting it together in order to have job data every quarter. Is the whole process going to, there is no mechanism in place. It was not done by the UPA government and we are still working on it. So though organization, including the central government or the state government, has full picture when it comes to
let's
data.
use the smell test that he spoke about, Arun Kumar, because the government will argue if unemployment was indeed at a 4.5-decade high, there would have been riots on the street, there would have been civil strife, and the BJP would have been down to 50 seats. Instead, they've come back with 300 plus seats, which means, yes, of course, unemployment is a problem, jobs need to be created, but it's not as if it's as bad as it's ever been.
No, you see, economic perception and political perception can always differ. You know, you can have a very bad economic situation. You could have a very good situation like in 2004 elections and the BJP government lost in spite of 8.4% rate of growth, India shining. So economic and political perceptions move differently. You've had any number of interviews coming out saying, yes, we've lost because of demonetization, but this was a good step by the government, so we're supporting the government, you know. So economic and political perceptions can always differ. Now, the point is, a survey like the NSSO is a household survey. So it counts the number of people who are doing taxi aggregator work, who are in e-commerce. It counts everybody. It doesn't leave out anybody. And our sample of 1,60,000 is much bigger than the US sample, which is 4,000 only, you know. So we cover a large number of areas. We don't leave out things in our... So NSSO is reliable. CMI is also 1,60,000 sample. That's also relatively reliable, you know. So we can't say that what they are saying is wrong. Mudra data, which the government said would show a lot of employment, has not been released till now, even though it came in February. Why was it not released? I have no idea, you know. So in other words, employment is a problem. Why is employment a problem? Because of two things. Investment is down. It peaked in 2012-13 at about 36-37%. It's down to 30-32%. And technology. Technology is displacing. Like you go to a bank now, you can deposit money, do your passbook, etc., all by machines. So even though the work of banks has increased by 100-fold over the last 30 years, but the employment has come to half.
So, Jayjit, how much of this
the organized
is
sector
down
will not generate jobs. It's the unorganized sector, and especially the micro sector. MSME is a misnomer because micro sector is 99% of the MSME, employs 97.5%. That's where the crisis is. How do you deal with the crisis of employment in the micro sector? That is the big problem. And that, if you want, I'll tell later.
So, Jayjit, you know, on the one side, you've got the question about whether the government is doing enough to create jobs and what more can be done. The other side is about technology causing disruption in the workplace. For example, you've got artificial intelligence coming in, machine learning coming in. So with automation, lots of jobs that existed earlier now in manufacturing processes don't exist. How much of the problem is because of the government's policy interventions in your view, and how much of it is technological?
So, you know, the march of technology will have to go on. In fact, what we have done is stop the march of technology in agriculture. So we're waiting for farmers to commit suicide rather than getting out of agriculture, because you don't need so many farmers in this country. So we need to have the march of technology. Having said that, what's different in the kind of technology that's coming in now compared to what's happening earlier? To give you an example, when there was the switch from the switching of telephones to the rotary dial in US, there was a nationwide strike because a lot of people lost their jobs. They were basically switching. They were taking out the plugs and switching in. The rotary dial took away their jobs. If the rotary dial had not come in, double the population of US just would have been doing the switching, right? So we need to have the march of technology coming in. Every technology till now has created more jobs than what it has destroyed. The summation now is that perhaps the fourth industrial revolution that's coming in may destroy more jobs than it creates. However, that's where I have a little difference in the kind of education we are providing, because if you're focusing on only vocational, that is actually at the target of all of this automation we're talking about. What we need is people who can contribute to AI annotation, be able to pilot drones, be able to get the new skills, the new kind of technologies. For that, the kind of education we need is qualitatively massively
different. That's a good
different.
point. Let's get Ajay Sriram in on this, because you were saying that vocational education should go up, but that's the first job that's going to go out of fashion. You won't need that. And China brought in from the United States so many of the top scientists who'd gone to the US for working there are now working with the largest grants in Chinese universities.
I don't believe that AI, IoT or artificial and robots are going to take over the manufacturing. I don't believe that. And it won't happen for the next 20 years. Let's look at it this way. The jobs which are going to be required, as was mentioned a little earlier, in the labor-intensive industries, whether it's tourism or whether it's garments or whether it's food processing, etc., will require people. It's going to. And wherever automation does come in, let's say in organized manufacturing, the tertiary employment which will be generated because of this automation and productivity increase is going to more than offset the people who are going to be not employed because of automation.
But Mr.
So I think across the board, job creation will actually go up with industrial activity, including with automation in the relevant areas.
Mr. Narendran, what are your thoughts on this? Because we've already seen in several sectors, especially for example with automobiles, a lot of the work is now being done with robots. And even in the IT sector, for example, you've got people who worked for 15-20 years who built a certain set of skills who now find themselves jobless because technology is changed in a way, coding is changed in a way that their skills are no longer required. They've been asked to go home.
Yeah. So I think the nature of jobs will keep changing. It is a fact that in the auto industry, for instance, industrial robots have got cheaper and cheaper, and they work 24/7 and they don't have unions. So that's very convenient, right? Similarly, what's happening with AI and analytics is that industrial robots took away the manual work. AI and analytics is taking away a lot of the thinking work. So it's not that the service industry is also secure, and that's what is happening. But to me, reskilling will continue, and reskilling has to be, education does not end with school or college. And I think if you say that I stopped learning at the age of 22 or 23 and then I'd work for 30, 40 years, I think that era is over. You have to continuously reskill, reinvent yourself. There will be different types of jobs which will be created. There will be a shortage for good quality skills in anything. It could be a data scientist, or it could be a very specialized job which is very difficult to be done by an industrial robot or something else. So I think increasingly the average job getting high salaries will go away. You need to be specialized in whatever you do.
But that, Jayjit, shows the level of the challenge that India confronts and the thorough unpreparedness to deal with it. We've set up some kind of a fourth industrial center, but we're just talking about it, and look at how China is marching down with all the latest 5G technologies which they are pushing, and that's creating its own dynamics.
So there's two parts to it. One is the fact that when we were investing in setting up the IITs and the higher education institutions, the rest of Asia was actually investing heavily in primary education. So the foundational education is so strong that when the technology changes, the requirement changes, they can switch. They can fill up a form, they can enter into a factory, they can get a salary, they can do their accounting. Those are basic skills that are needed. Unfortunately, we have missed out on that. Are we losing jobs today as we speak in 2019 because of too much of automation? That's not true, as you rightly pointed out. That's a future outlook. But it's a future that we keep missing out. China started planning what they were planning way back in 2006, 2007, and I was involved with the Chinese Academy of Science at that point in time for certain reasons on open source microprocessors that they were looking at. We have not yet woken up and started looking at the next 10 years of where we will be going, and therefore re-architecting where our education will be going, what kind of skills we need to impart, and as you rightly said, there has to be a rapid reskilling infrastructure. We are not planning that reskilling infrastructure.
How prepared are we for these challenges being posed by automation? And if all of this rolls out at the pace as being anticipated, the unemployment crisis could get a whole lot worse?
Not really, on the opposite. In fact, all this technology it's up to you. You can look upon them as disruptors, or you just co-opt. I think we have no option. We have to co-opt. It's not that black and white. China is a different society altogether, different civilization, different political system. I don't think we should be getting inspiration from China. We have to build our own model. The fact is, you go to Agra today and just go and look for a good guide to show you around, and you can't find one single guide in Agra. At the same time, unemployment rate there may be 15%. That's the true story. Today, you as anchor, look for 3 world-class sociologists to discuss, for instance, rape problem in India. You won't find more than one world-class, I'm saying. Look at energy, that is area I specialize on.
What's the point you're making?
Point I'm trying to make is that, there are opportunities. People just sway with this, they all want to be engineers. Maybe they all want to be
Okay, so Arun
doctors.
Kumar, respond to this.
There are millions of opportunities in
that
other
people
areas.
need to upskill even halfway through their careers, keep acquiring new knowledge, not assume that I passed out of college or university and that's the end of my life.
As been said by the previous panelists, our primary education has been terrible. We've not invested enough in our education system. The target by the Kothari Committee was 6% of GDP. Malaysia, etc., spent 10% of GDP on education. And Amartya Sen in his paper in 1986 pointed out, why is it that Southeast Asian workers are far more productive? Because they spent on health and on education. And that's what led to productivity. And that's what will lead to continuous upgradation. So you need to spend at least 6% of GDP on education, but you've never spent more than 4% on public education. So you need to do that first thing. Second is health. We never spent 3% of GDP on health. We've never exceeded 1.3%. Third thing is your investment pattern. 80% of all investment goes into the organized sector, which doesn't generate jobs. So your organized sector, private sector job generation has gone up from 7.5 million to 10 million in the last 30 years. The workforce has increased by 250 million. So everybody else has to go into the unorganized sector. Why is it we are not able to pull people out of agriculture? Because we're not generating enough non-agriculture work. So therefore, in a sense, your investment pattern, your technology, your public finance, all that goes into it, and your education. how will you find the resources to put at least 6% of GDP on education, 3% on health? That is very crucial, and that has to start today. Acer reports show that 50% children in the 5th class cannot read second class textbook, cannot do second class maths, cannot do second class writing. Formally they're in the 5th, effectively they're in the 2nd.
Okay.
They drop out. They will never be able to do a good job.
In the last part of this conversation, I now want to look at how this government should deal with the trade squeeze from the United States. Remember, India should really be one of the strategic allies of the US in its battle against China. But Donald Trump is not just firing towards Beijing, he's firing across the Himalayas at Delhi as well, and we have a royal challenge on our hands. Or we have a Harley-Davidson challenge on our hands. Now, how do we deal with this? Mr. Narendran, I'll start with you, because, the Indian Prime Minister went for the SCO summit. You've got Putin there, you've got China there. Those are complex relations in any case to handle. And the United States, which should really be our most stable partner, has started a new war. We're dealing with a three-front war on trade.
So I think fundamentally India has to create its own destiny. I think each country will, across the world, is now starting to look after their own self-interests, right? So the biggest thing going for us is we are potentially one of the most exciting markets, home markets. And so I think there's enough opportunity within India for Indian companies to become global scale if they invest well and plan well. And there's enough opportunity in India to attract global investment. So I think from those points of view, we are, I would say, much better placed to deal with these challenges as the world is getting more and more insular. So we should leverage that. I think we should leverage that. I think, like I said, investing in infrastructure, reducing the cost of doing business, the demand growth will come eventually.
No, but one of the big challenges, Mr. Sriram, is to increase exports. And if you've got preferential treatment that's being meted out to India by friends like America being withdrawn, that creates problems. So that adds to the government's headaches on the economic front. How should they deal with it?
It is an issue, because if import duties come in by a country, automatically you become less competitive compared to others. I think this is where India has a great opportunity. What's happening between, say, China and US?
No, I would agree with you if it was happening only between China and the US, but it's also the firing is coming across the Himalayas as well.
Well, to a degree, but comparatively it's smaller. But I think the crux of the matter is India has to become more competitive in its own positioning vis-a-vis the world economy.
No, let me counter that. You're saying that it's lesser than China, but I'm saying we don't know how bad it could get, because, for example, Donald Trump has said don't buy the Russian missile defense system, the S-400. India insists on going ahead and doing so. We've already seen with Turkey, US go after a strategic ally that's one of their key military partners as well. So we don't know where Donald Trump will stop firing. He's a tough negotiator. He's going after us right now.
You're right. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know where it's going to go. So I'll come back to the point that we ourselves have to become more competitive to be able to compete in the world. And I would say the Make in India program, which was initiated by the government 3-4 years ago, I think that should get a greater thrust and push. And the second point I'd like to say is, Rahul, India is actually 29 mini Indias within one India. Most of our states, most of our issues are concurrent subjects. The center has a policy, but ultimately the state takes the final decision. How do we pull out 8 or 10 states in the country and work closely from the center who are forward-looking, who are productive, to bring about the change in orientation, to really get them up so that they become competitive for the world? I think Make in India has to be pushed much harder, which can make this change of making India competitive. And I would tend to agree with what Narendran is saying. We have the advantage of a large consumption center. How do we increase that?
But this is, to my mind, one of the biggest foreign policy challenges for the Modi Sarkar, Mr. Taneja, because you've got America telling us, don't take Huawei technologies for 5G. If we take it, it's cheaper, the rollout can be much faster. And if we don't, it could push back the rollout of 5G, could push back how quickly we can adapt to the 4th industrial revolution. So how do you intend to deal with all these challenges? You've got challenges on all sides.
You see, we follow very independent international economic policies, fiercely independent. The US knows it. You see, for instance, they can say what they want, but the fact is that the United States is also very important strategic partner for us. You see, they anchor Indo-Pacific policy, and we are a very enthusiastic part of the Indo-Pacific policy. We are the beneficiary. And again, for the point that Mr. Sriram raised over being more competitive, we need American capital. We need American technology precisely for that reason. So it's interdependent, and they know it. Mr. Trump also knows it. But the point is that he says, don't buy it from Russia because he wants to sell something else to us. But the fact is, we have already signed an agreement with Russia.
I can tell you on good authority that the government's been trying very hard to make the kind of allowances that Trump has asked for. Despite that, they withdrew the GSP from us. No. So he thinks it's a Manhattan land deal that he's negotiating.
Let me complete that. You see, the point is, yes, on some areas you might say that, all right, he has not exactly what he wanted, but there are a number of other areas where actually he's doing precisely what we want, and that mainly in the region of Indo-Pacific. You see, the point is we have to look at the geopolitical reality, geo-economic reality, and we have to take a long-term picture. And there, we need American capital, we need American technology, and technology especially in some critical areas.
So we have taken the Modi Sarkar can get the better of negotiator Trump, because as he used to show on his reality TV show as well, Trump always wins when it comes to a negotiation.
Oh, here, ask them. So far, we have won.
If you look at the history of our negotiations, every free trade agreement we have signed, we have lost. So it's not just about this regime. Just let's look at India as a government and how Indian government performs. We have been losing out in every FTA, which is why we're not signing any more FTAs. So by being a tough negotiator, we're basically walking away from the table. We're not negotiating. And that's an issue. The larger point is that what are we worried about? Are we worried about not being able to get imports from America and from China of technology, which is connected to the previous conversation we were having, that we do not have enough education in this country to be actually leaders in technology. We're not able to lead technologies, we'll always be importing technologies, and therefore we are at the mercy of what US says or what China says. So we are saying that US is saying, please do not buy technology from Russia and China. Well, why should we buy from any of them? It was visible that 5G is coming in. We have companies in India, and I can name a few of them, which have got very good, robust technologies, maybe not as good as what Huawei or the US firms have, but can we start working with them? Can we encourage them? And I believe this government is actually working towards that. I think it needs to be given much more impetus.
Is that one of the biggest failures, that we are figuring out whether we want to buy 5G from the Chinese or the Americans instead of having the technology ready ourselves?
So that has been a failure. We haven't developed technology. We've done repeated imports of technology. So whether it be fertilizer or whether it be anything else, power plants, we've done repeated. But today the problem is different. Today the problem is the world situation is very unstable. All the oil countries, facing a huge crisis, whether it be Iran or Russia or Venezuela, the US has put sanctions, and every time there's an oil crisis, energy crisis, Indian economy goes into a crisis. You look at the history of the last 40 years, we are facing that. Second is not only the US-China relation, but also Brexit. Eurozone is getting, disturbed. There's likely to be a recession, in which case our exports are not likely to grow, and our demand problem, because the rate of growth is slowing down, therefore what's going to happen is that investment is going to slow down. If our data is wrong and the foreign investors suspect that data is wrong, then they'll say profitability will be less, they'll invest less, But let me say that foreign investment is only 5% of the total investment. We need to focus on the internal investment. How do we get that going? Let's not be fooled by the fact that IMF and the World Bank are supporting our 7% rate of growth, because they don't collect independent data. They only take the government data and recycle that. So World Bank and IMF saying we are growing at 7% doesn't mean that's an independent support. What we need to do is boost demand in the economy, then private sector will invest more, foreign investment will come in because our profitability will rise. If our economy is slowing down, why would the foreign investment come in? So I think we need to focus on a different thing, just not Trump and India.
Okay, so we've had a very interesting conversation. I'm not certain we found very concrete answers. That's because the challenges are so big. But it's been an important conversation to have. So I'm glad that we could set this up here at the CII India Today Industry Roundtable. I want to thank our guests for joining us. Thank you very much. Let's also now see what the Finance Minister actually does when she presents her first budget on the 5th of July. Thank you all for joining us on the India Today CII Roundtable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the video. For more such news and updates, please like, share and subscribe to India Today. Also check out our other great videos from our channel. We know you will love to.